On a cold January day across the northern part of the United States of America, we bring you the first edition of Alumni Talk of 2024. I'm Matt Sossler, joined by former Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Kenny Anderson, who played in one of the coldest football games in the history of the NFL, the Freezer Bowl, the AFC Championship, back in 1982 against the San Diego Chargers. And before we talk about the Freezer Bowl, Kenny, this past week was an utter weather disaster for the NFL. You have minus temperatures in Kansas City, a snowstorm in Buffalo, and they just happened to get lucky that Detroit plays in a dome.
Yeah. I know the Buffalo thing, that was the tough deal because of, you couldn't drive around. They had the travel ban up there. Pittsburgh could not get in. There's no way you're going to have the game. I heard that they tried to pay fans to come and help shovel out the stadium, but there was a travel ban, and so that didn't work until, the morning of the game, and you couldn't get it all done. So it's kind of interesting watching shots from the stadium, the people getting in there, walking to their seats, and all it is snow and kind of carving out their little place for them to sit or stand.
It was general admission, a rare time for a playoff game that you could pay for seats way up in the nosebleeds, and it's basically you pay for your seat by shoveling out your spot at Bill's Stadium. So nonetheless, Buffalo goes on to beat Pittsburgh in that contest. Kansas City against Miami, which was a very similar situation to the Freezer Bowl. You get a nice warm weather team having to come into a cold weather city and then play in absolute adverse conditions. But let's turn back the clock. The Freezer Bowl played on January the 10th, 1982. Cincinnati Bengals 27, San Diego Chargers, Eric Coryell with Dan Fouts, Don Coryell, Kellen Winslow, and they just couldn't get anything going. Meanwhile, your offense was clicking on all cylinders.
Well, yeah, the tough thing that day was not the temperature. It was with the wind chill 59 below, which to set the record straight was the coldest game by wind chill in NFL history. It's the second coldest game on the thermometer to the Ice Bowl or whatever they called it in Green Bay when the Packers beat Dallas. They were 13 below. We were 9 below, but we got them beat on the wind chill. But it was more the wind than it was the cold that day. You can't describe what 59 below feels like, but, when it's 9 degrees below zero and winds are, gusting 30 miles an hour and above, that was the tough part of the conditions.
And it was also a rare occurrence in the NFL, one of the few games in NFL history where the same team kicked off to begin both halves. You won the toss and elected to kick.
Well, we elected to take the win. And, which was, a big deal. But I will say this. I think the key to the game, one of the keys, is we scored twice going into the win. So I think that was a big deal in the game. But, if you watch the replays of that game, Dan trying to throw some of the out routes and things along the sideline, the ball is just fluttering early in the game. I'm trying to throw a flare pass to Pete Johnson towards the sideline, and the ball gets caught in the wind and dies. And so we figured out pretty quickly that if we could throw the ball straight ahead between the numbers, we were going to be able to have some success. So that's where most of our passing game came from.
And was there an alternate strategy? Obviously, teams have to adjust. You look at your example from the Freezer Bowl. You look at what Miami had to do against Kansas City just this past week. How did the adjustments in practice, knowing that you'd be playing in suboptimal conditions, change in terms of the strategy, in terms of ultimately how you were able to have success in a nightmare of a situation?
Well, I think it's easier, in my opinion, to go from hot to cold than it is from going cold to hot. My first playoff game was in 1973 against the Dolphins down in Miami. And we had a cold stretch in Cincinnati, and Paul Brown believed in the players sleeping in their own beds. So we practiced in Cincinnati all week and didn't fly to Miami until, Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon. And we got there and, boy, it was nice that it was warm, but with the heat and humidity, it became a physical toll. And all of a sudden, at the end of the first quarter, you could feel yourself, hitting the wall. You didn't have enough fluids in you. It's all those things that go on with heat. But when you go to play in cold weather, it's more the mental aspect of being able to handle it. And the tough thing in that era was you didn't have all the cold weather gear that they have now. We didn't have the pouches that you could put around you with heating packs on the inside. I know Dan Faust was trying to pull his hands up inside his long sleeve top that he had on, and I was trying to put mine down the front of my pants and grab my t-shirt as much as I could. And they did bring in heated benches, which we had never seen before. And I will tell you one story about that it was the middle of the first quarter, and we're on the sideline, and I'm sitting there. Luckily, I have my helmet on, and I'm sitting on the bench, and they have little slots for your feet to go in. And somebody had thrown a cape over me, and I'm there for a minute, and there's a large roar in the crowd, and I want to stand up to see if there's a turnover, and if I'm going back in the game. I stand up, my feet don't come out, and I go down, and the first thing that hits is my face mask. And I'm seeing stars, and I'm calling for the trainer. I said, give me smelling salts, do something. I can't get knocked out of the championship game falling off, the bench. In today's world, somebody would have caught it on camera. It would still be on Football Follies. But more importantly, I might have had to go into concussion protocol and not finish the game.
Who would have thought that advanced technology would knock a quarterback out of the game? We saw that a little bit last week with Patrick Mahomes. He didn't miss any time, though, despite his helmet physically breaking into multiple pieces.
I've never seen that happen, before. But, like I say, it's never easy to go out and play in cold weather. But I think, with the things that they have now, that it's a little bit easier for the players to stay warm. And I know, before our game, there was talk with the league office about postponing the game. And, for the next several days, the forecast wasn't going to change in Cincinnati. So talking with medical people, they determined it was safe to play the game. And, people always say it wasn't fair for San Diego to have to play in Miami the week before when it's 84 degrees and come here when it's minus 59. But they forget that earlier in the year that we thumped them pretty good in their place in San Diego. Had they beaten us at their ballpark, the AFC Championship game would have been in their stadium. So we earned the right to play in that weather.
Oh, yeah, and your stat line backed it up. You did not let this weather bother you. You also were not limited. 14 of 22, 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a QBR of 115.9. In minus 59, disastrous wins. Also, your yards per attempt, 7.3. So it's not like you're throwing screens here and there behind the line of scrimmage. The leash was off you on that day.
Oh, yeah, no, and I think one of the things, normally, if you look back at the stats of that year, we were a passing team, and we were going to throw the ball 30-plus times a game. So we didn't throw it as much as normal, but we were having success running the football. We had 2 big backs, Pete Johnson and Charlie Alexander, who had some success running the football. We had a great offensive line. And I think, a couple of keys of the game is I think I had at least 3 big runs for first downs, going up the middle. So, I think it does help to have a little bit, somewhat of a mobile quarterback when you're playing in bad conditions.
And what's your favorite story other than tripping over your feet and almost having to be taken out of the game because you fell flat on your face because of the advanced technology? But what was your favorite story of the game?
Well, it was the fourth quarter. I had ran and I got sandwiched between 2 guys and I got dinged and I was seeing stars for a few minutes and they took me off the field. And I think I only missed 1 play before I came back in. But, back in those days, it wasn't the doctors or the trainers or, that told you when you were healthy and ready to go. It was the head coach. So when Forrest Gregg, got over to the sidelines and we talked, he said, okay, you're going to go. You're good to go. You're back in. So we finished up the game with a scoring drive. And it was nice to be able to stand down with. At that point, late in the game, it was over. We're in the huddle, just killing time, and newspapers are flying all over the field. The wind's blowing, and to know we're going to the Super Bowl in 2 weeks.
And you look at the technology between nowadays, heated benches, the field is heated. Basically, everything is heated to the point where you're not dealing with minus 59. You're probably dealing with a balmy 20 degrees on the field. You mentioned some of your techniques to stay warm, but you see guys like Tyreek Hill, who's out there sleeveless. Was there any of that back in?
Oh yeah, our offensive linemen came without sleeves on. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't have an inch of Vaseline on their arms to help prevent the cold, but they came out without sleeves on because, San Diego had a good defensive line and they didn't want any extra cloth for them to be able to grab. So it was not – sometimes I think they wanted to show how tough they were, but it was more of a practical thing than it was maybe, to combat or to psych the other team out.
And what's the mindset heading into a game like this? We saw the biggest question this year, and I'm sure San Diego had a similar mentality back in '82. But you look at a team that's used to playing in the warm. They have to go play in the cold because of a loss in the season. If Miami beat Buffalo or won any other game throughout the season, they wouldn't have had to go to Kansas City. They would have been hosting. Ultimately, you never know how it would have worked, but they would have hosted Pittsburgh based on how the ledger would have gone through. But what's the mindset heading in to something like that?
Well, I mean, we had a real tough head coach in Forrest Gregg, and he made us not only tough physically, but mentally as well. And I think his pregame speech was very brief. He said, man, this is going to be a lot like going to the dentist. You know it's going to hurt, but you got to go anyway. But we had we did more on Saturdays in our practices than teams nowadays do on Thursday and Fridays, I think. And so we had a regular practice. We did 7-on-7. We did full speed 2-minute drills, and we were out in those conditions in our stadium and practiced in them. So we had maybe a little bit of advantage there. San Diego had the chance to practice, and they didn't do much out on the field, but. I think the other thing back in those days, too, is, we had the old AstroTurf, and basically it was just the carpet laid over asphalt. So the field was, in those cases, was really hard. And when you fell, you felt it a lot.
Also, Forrest Gregg played in the Ice Bowl, the 1967 NFL championship game, Packers and Dallas, based on the record, the first coldest game based on the temperature. And my last question is, do you have any advice for if a player has to go play in these conditions? What's your number one piece of advice to him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you just got to suck it up. I mean, and here it is. We got to go play. But, the thing for me is I had a pair of gloves that I would wear on the sidelines, a big pair of gloves, and I would make sure that somebody else had those on when I'm on the field, so they were already warm on the inside when I came back, so my hands could, warm up, very quickly. I mean, gosh, back in those days, before the heated benches, we just had, 55-gallon drums with fire in it. Guys would go, and I remember one time, an official caught his gloves on fire because he was over there, during a TV timeout, and we had players who catch a few things on fire back in those days too. So a little bit difference nowadays, but I think when you look at both those games played in cold weather, I think both the teams, Miami struggled a little bit more, but other than that, I think Buffalo and Kansas City played very well.
And they'll be the only cold weather game this week, considering that the NFL is going to have Baltimore's not supposed to be that bad. And then they get the gift of Detroit hosting one. Then you got Buffalo. And so it should be a much colder week of NFL football, to say the least. Yeah,
I'm glad we're not playing it in Cincinnati this week. We had some snow that's out there today, a fairly good amount for it. So be a little bit different conditions if the Bengals had to play at home this week. But no, but this is, to me, what football is all about. You go back when I was growing up, there were no dome stadiums, and late in the year you played outside, and you played when it was snow. And how many times did you go out as a kid in the backyard and play in the backyard in the snow? I know you had your parkas on and your gloves on, but we're still playing football in the snow. So I think that's the way that football was made to be played, and I always enjoyed playing in bad weather.
Well, that's the best thing is, especially nowadays, at least for me, is we would only be allowed to play tackle football if there were 3 inches of snow on the ground. Back in college, we'd love it when we have a snow day. Snow football instantly, 2:00, this field. And that would be the only time that we would play tackle. When there's 3 inches of snow on the ground. And I wasn't the best at it considering I'm more of a speed guy, and the snow did nothing to help me. But it was still it's still a good time. And like you said, that's the weather that football is meant to be playing. It truly deciphers, honestly, who belongs to go back to the warm for the Super Bowl, wherever that may be.
Yeah, and let's give a lot of credit to the fans. That day that we played in Cincinnati, there weren't any empty seats. And, looking in Kansas City and in Buffalo, I didn't see empty seats in either one of those stadiums. So, the fans know it's a big game, and they show up as well.
And they will show up again this week. Before I let you go, Kenny, your Super Bowl prediction. We're down to 8 teams. I know the Bengals, when Joe Burrow went down, that sort of had things go south for them. But who do you have taking their talents to Vegas?
I don't know. I think San Francisco is going to be tough to beat, but I really hope that the Lions, win this week to get to an NFC championship game. I think Kansas City and Buffalo is going to be, one heck of a game too. This is the first time Mahomes has had to go on the road for a playoff game other than the Super Bowl itself. So I don't know. Josh Allen's got it kind of rolling. So I'm kind of looking for maybe a Buffalo San Francisco Super Bowl.
The Buffalo San Francisco Super Bowl. The Bills, who lost 4 in a row in the early 90s, might have a chance to have some Vegas luck to bring their first Super Bowl back to Western New York. Well, Kenny, I thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Alumni Talk. Stay tuned to Alumni News and the rest of Alumni Media. Plenty of playoff coverage. We're down to 8 teams on the road to Super Bowl 58 on alumnimedia.com.